So I'm here with my good friends Valerie and Corina. I was thinking that I was going to have to wait to start this podcast until I got to the Holy Land, but actually you beat me there and just got back a few days ago. So I thought it'd be neat to kind of interview you or speak with you and get a pilgrim's perspective on how your trip was. So I guess, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
Shalom.
What made you want to go to the Holy Land? What was the thought behind your trip? Why'd you plan it?
I have always wanted to go. It's something that was always kind of in my future plan, and a friend of mine planned the trip with her mother, so I decided I could go. I'm going to do it. And I signed up for it, and Corina
got signed up by you?
Didn't commit originally.
I was transitioning jobs, so I wasn't sure if I could swing it, but then I was like, whatever my job situation is, I'm just going to tell them I'm leaving. And I booked the trip, and it was totally fine, and they were all so excited that I was there. So that's how we got there. I think we planned this in the summer, or before the summer, and we just came back.
That's awesome. What were your first impressions when you got there? Like, what was the first thing, either coming out of the airport or, I don't know, when you finally woke up after the flight?
Well, we flew into Tel Aviv and spent the first night there, and Tel Aviv is very much a city, a lot of young people, very vibrant. Even though it was Friday, which is Shabbat, it felt, honestly, to me, it kind of felt like I was in Barcelona, because it's on the water, and so we didn't really get that like Holy Land experience the first night. But then I think like the second day when we started our tour, and you learn about how old this place is, and this is, like terrain that Jesus saw with his eyes, and I think that's when it kind of starts to feel like you're in somewhere special.
That first bus trip we took from Tel Aviv, we left, and it was a tour of 24 people, which was a nice size, and we started to drive away from the sea, which we had immersed ourselves in at 6:30 in the morning because we had to. It was beautiful, beautiful water, beautiful weather in November. And we started to drive, and you're driving in desert. I mean, it doesn't look like anything that we see here. You see mountains far off, but it's a lot of white sand. And so they're very light colored mountains, and you start to get the feeling like, oh, we're heading to Nazareth now. And we stopped on the way at Caesarea to get a taste of the history and the archaeology there, and it started to bring you into, wow, this is 2,000 years old. So we kind of had a little bit of a prep to get to Nazareth, and when we got to Nazareth, it was this very tiny, busy village, really, and obviously built up, but it was this feeling of like, oh, we've arrived, and we are pilgrims, because it was really quite a journey.
It's a long flight. I've never been. I'm waiting to go. But what was it? About 10 hours?
It was 10 hours to get there, but it was 12 to get home.
Wow.
And the 10 to get there we flew overnight, and we
slept.
It was fine.
Yeah.
It was totally fine, and we were so excited. But when we got into Nazareth, I think it's all started to hit us. And the first stop was the Basilica of the Annunciation, and we were just floored, because I did not expect. I didn't really realize that it was so many caves that Jesus lived in. Grottos and caves. And it's there. It's all really there.
Are the caves outside, or are they inside of churches?
Basically, every holy site, a church has been built over.
Okay.
So, right? Every
Absolutely.
single place we saw, it's in a church, and one church more beautiful than the next. This one was the grotto was like in the basement, and then the church was in like a circle around it, and you could see from like the mezzanine down to the grotto.
Did the tour guide like speak to you about what you were going to see before you got there?
Yeah, we had an absolutely phenomenal tour guide who not only took us everywhere like with no line, quick. We didn't linger anywhere. We got amazing food, and then her background of everything. She gave us information before we went, while we were there, after we went, and it was just 7 days of pretty much story. So if you want to go to the Holy Land, you need a tour guide.
Yes.
Ask Father David, we have an amazing one.
We never...
I hope I can meet her. I mean, I
Yes.
need a tour guide when I get there.
Yes, and we didn't realize it was a faith-based tour. So, we weren't on one of the, popular priest tours or the Franciscans, or we didn't do that because my friend hadn't booked that. She booked a faith-based tour, which included, we had 4 masses, we had a rosary procession, and our tour guide, who wasn't actually even Catholic, knew so much and read passages from the Bible every time we were somewhere, like at the Mount of Beatitudes. She read the Beatitudes, from the Bible. When we went to Capernaum, she read passages. It was just very, she tied everything in, and I was a little in shock that she wasn't Catholic.
Yeah.
And we didn't even really realize it all the way till the end when we actually asked her, because she was just so knowledgeable. She also was an archaeologist, so she had been on a lot of the digs in the area and knew so much history.
Yes, she was. There's a lot of archaeologist sites that you see in King Herod and just from 2,000 years ago to today. And her depth of knowledge, towards the end, to be honest, we were like, I can't hear what
you just get saturated.
We
I'm
got
the last day we were in King Herod's palace on top of the Dead Sea, and I was like,
in Masada,
overload.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm still processing.
Well, that's the great thing, right? Is you can learn a lot, and then as you see pictures or look back even through your own photos, you'll be like, wait a second, she said this or that about this place. And
it is so much packed history and information in one place. And then you have that spiritual element where, first just seeing the Basilica of the Annunciation and seeing where Mary, I'll explain it to you what the Annunciation is, where Mary heard from the angel Gabriel that Jesus was going to be her baby. We literally were so floored with that first announcement that that's where we were, and that
you cried.
Standing
it's
there.
Overwhelming. The trip was overwhelmingly magical, and you experience feelings that you've never experienced before because you've never done something.
Was there some, you mentioned the Bible, right, that your tour guide would bring up different passages from the Bible. Was there something that you had heard or thought of a certain way, and then when you saw it, it was completely different than what you would imagine?
Pretty much everything.
Really?
Everything.
In what way?
Well, we have paintings that are all in beautiful color and beautiful robes and beautiful scenery. And, we have manger scenes with wooden mangers, and you get there and you're like, well, that really isn't how it was. I mean, at Church of the Nativity, where the Holy Family lived, it was basically,
rock. It was rock.
Caves.
Yeah.
It was over caves. And in Capernaum at St. Peter's mother's house, they had so much excavation there, and the water systems and all these things right on the Sea of Galilee. And it was so moving to walk into this church, which actually had a glass area in the center on the floor. It was a tiered church, and you could just see everything while you're standing there, down below and out to the Sea of Galilee. Wow. It was all glass, and it was just so moving. And Capernaum, you don't think. I mean, you hear it, but I never really envisioned what it was until we got there. And they have the homeless Jesus, like a sculpture of Jesus laying on a bench, and it's just all these things. You're in a swirl of, okay, Mount of Beatitudes. We're up there, and the sun is setting, and it's just magical, and you're on a mountain, and you're like, this is where he gave the Beatitudes.
A priest friend of mine put it well, and he said, it's like in the Bible where it says the Word became flesh. When you go to the Holy Land, you see all of these stories become flesh. They become real, just like God did.
How about the Transfiguration? Tell Father David about when we were at the Church of the Transfiguration where that happened, what we experienced.
So, in general, the whole week, the way the sun came through the clouds every single day was raised. I have pictures, I don't know if you can add them, but literally everywhere we were, it was sun. When you see the sun, sometimes you're like, oh, look, God's coming through. It was everywhere we went, Sea of Galilee the entire day. So that alone is overwhelming, because you're like, okay, this cannot be a coincidence here.
Yeah.
And then we're on the top of
it's the Church of the Transfiguration,
up
on a big balcony.
You're on there's the church, and then this big balcony, and the weather was a little overcast every day, but gorgeous and sunny. And then the sun just was like breaking through, and you're on top of this mountain, and you see the valleys, and you see the farms and villages, and you're just like, how am I worthy enough to be here?
And she had read, like you said, the tour guide had read the passage of the Transfiguration, and he appeared in white, and the big white cloud was there, and the sun just right behind it started beaming rays all around it. We're standing there going, wait, is this happening?
So do you think that was like the most powerful experience of your trip?
I think that one was a really special one, but I feel like every site we went to, we experienced that kind of, oh my gosh, I can't believe we are standing here and this happened. I mean, even in Cana, Cana, very simple church built over the site, but you go down
and there's the vessel, like one of the vessels that held the wine.
Big vessels, and they're massive, and it's just not what I imagined.
Yeah.
What these things would look like.
It's also, you're a tourist, like you're seeing these sites, so you're kind of going quickly through them, but you're also like, oh my gosh, this is like when we saw in Bethlehem, when there's this like little one door that gets down to the place where Jesus was born, and then where the manger, they think the manger would have been. You go through it so quickly because there's so many people and it's closing, and so you're just it's like, that's another thing that happens. You're like, you have to like really process that and the land looks different, right? Like everything is built on, so it's like a lot of emotions at once.
A lot of emotions, and you're not sure actually when they come up. You're like, wait, what is this? I'm in Bethlehem, and I just touched the spot where they believe Jesus was born, and then we go out down into this area, and they're like, Jesus and Mary went way back into a cave, and there was a cave, and there was a place for hay, and they used all these areas, but they were very well protected, and it was just so. It was so interesting, and we had a different tour guide for that because we were technically in Palestine, right? So we had to have a Palestinian guide.
Yeah.
Our guide wasn't allowed to go in and do that. He was really knowledgeable. He grew up in Bethlehem. And it was, and also Bethlehem, I think, in Jerusalem, they were the most crowded places we were. When we were up in Nazareth and Galilee,
it's more countryside, right? From what I've heard, it
is
a lot more relaxed.
Yeah,
Yes.
and their tour buses and people are all going in a pretty reverent manner. Like when we got to the Jordan River, it's in the middle of, I think, what used to be military area. It really wasn't open.
Jordan's on the other side, and you're in Palestine, which when we drive into Palestine, the reason we were allowed to go is one, because we were tourists, and our guide was allowed to go because she is a tour guide, but she is Jewish, and Jewish people are not allowed to be in Palestine. So it's, again, you're just like, you're in the Middle East. I think we were also very surprised, but the terrain of Israel, it is different. Every 10 minutes you drive, it is tropical, it's dry, it's lush, there's palm trees everywhere, there's palm trees, plants, farms, mangoes, avocados, bananas. So then there's some areas where the sun is so, like by the Dead Sea, it is so salty that all the clouds dissipate. So it's just like perfectly blue sky, and it's a small country, but it's like
so diverse,
so diverse, and
so diverse. And the olive trees, when we went to Gethsemane, oh my gosh! First of all, we were up on this high kind of ridge overlooking all of Jerusalem, and she said we're going to walk down the Palm Sunday path, which I always imagined to be flat and not very long. This was a pretty long and windy downhill path, and it's down to, you're among all the olive trees, and again, we got to go into this beautiful church and actually
that's where we started.
Touch the rock where the agony in the garden.
In the Garden of Gethsemane. We started there, and then we walked down. And it's a big rock. They have a big mosaic of it on the ceiling. a multiple tiered rock, but it's now completely flat because throughout the years people would chip away part of the rock to hold it. So that's another, like, you're seeing this rock, but it's not the way it was described or it was, and you just realize, like, wow, like, this is so ancient. This happened so long ago, right? Like,
and I just have to think too, like, now when you hear those gospel stories, or when you go to church and it's, I don't know, it's Holy Thursday or Good Friday or Easter Sunday or Christmas, which is coming up, like, your thoughts about those things are going to be so much more colorful.
We were in the upper room.
Because, yeah, you were there. You saw it. You saw it, like you said, you saw what Jesus saw, right? You walked where he walked.
And the road on Calvary, the whole, it was just unbelievable, but not, you weren't alone on it. You know what I mean? It was, now there's lots of shops all up and down and little markets and just winding your way through it much longer than I thought, much hillier than I thought. And you're understanding, like, the difficulty, you know, I mean, obviously we know it was so difficult, but walking it, I'm like, this is a really long, hilly, difficult journey.
Well, maybe one last thought would be, when I used to give tours in Rome, I always thought that God had special graces in store for people that came to visit Rome. And I imagine with Jerusalem, it's probably that times 10, because you're actually going to where, well, the Word was made flesh and God became man. It's like, what do you think? It might be too early to even say, because like Corina said, you haven't really processed everything completely yet. But what do you think the spiritual kind of takeaways or fruits from this trip will be for you going forward? And maybe even more than that, like, how is this going to help your relationship with the Lord?
Well, when we were in Bethlehem, we had a small mass on top of the spot where Jesus was born. And the priest, he'd been there for 17 years, he's from India, and he said when he first came to Bethlehem, his mom was like, invite me, I'll come, set it up. And he said to her, you have to feel called to come here. I can't do that for you. So it took 17 years, and she saved the money and she went on her pilgrimage. So he said, he asked us to think about why we thought we were there and what, why God called us when he called us to go. So yes, definitely still figuring out why I was called to go, but I think going with my mom was extremely, extremely important. And sorry. I just think that it was his way of, I don't know why I'm getting emotional, but
it's
his way of just
it's an emotional trip. It's a beautiful trip.
His way of telling me that, like, as I'm 24, I'm about to turn 25, so as I embark on this not second half, but like a different half of my life, that be there with me, and I always have him to count on. So I think it was an important time in my life to kind of solidify my bond with him and see where it takes me.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, and for me it was a complete increase in faith. I just couldn't believe we were standing in these places, and it all really happened. It was all right there. And faith is such a personal and very varied thing for people, but for me it was just an unbelievable increase in my faith to be able to go and see it all and experience it and see all the other pilgrims. And at the end, Corina said to me, Mom, that was really a pilgrimage. We are actually pilgrims.
We got certificates from the Prime Minister of Israel, and the head guy of tourism gave everyone pilgrimage certificates, because we did the Holy Land.
Yeah.
We did the Holy Land. It
is so special.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that, and obviously I can't wait to get there. And yeah, I just think it's so beautiful you had the grace to be able to go, and I was super excited when I heard you were going, and I pray that yeah, that those experiences continue to kind of unpack themselves in your lives, right? As you continue this
Well, we'll
journey.
always have it to share. We'll always have the experiences to share. And I think that as we start to unpack it, we have each other to relate to or say, wait, do you remember that? Because it's going to start happening. Like, Christmas is going to come and we're going to be like, wow, we know where that was. We know what that looked like. And never before I've envisioned something else. And now my vision of everything I've ever heard, every gospel I've ever heard, my vision's changed.
That's great. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.